Hello everyone, I'm Ian Wishart and I'm here once more with the almost legendary Simon Clark to bring you another magnificent outing of the Take a Pew podcasts.
Yes, hello all you lovely listeners. But Ian, can I just question your use of the word magnificent? A bit over the top, don't you think?
Well, I spoke with our PR department.
What, you mean your wife, Julia?
Well, mainly yes. But anyway, I was advised that it's good not to play it down too much and I was counselled against the use of my first choice of adjective.
Which was what?
Borderline average.
Yeah, I see what they mean. OK, magnificent it is.
Good. Now, we have another very special guest this week.
By which you actually mean borderline average?
No, I absolutely do not. Because you may remember that one of our previous guests, Father Alex Hill, described a certain Bishop Pete Broadbent as the best bishop he had ever worked with.
Yes, I remember that.
And then East London vicar Chris Rogers also talked about Bishop Pete in incredibly glowing terms.
Yes, he did.
So, guess who we've got on the show today?
Wow, you don't mean it's the Reverend Kate Botley?
What? No, it's the Right Reverend Pete Broadbent. He's been a bishop for more than 20 years, he's been instrumental in leading Spring Harvest, and by all accounts, he's an all-round jolly good egg, apart from being a Spurs fan.
Oh dear.
Yeah. But we'll get into all that and more right now, because this is the Take a Pew podcast with the Right Reverend Pete Broadbent. You're supposed to repeat the name there, mate.
Oh, yes, sorry, mate, bit distracted by the Kate Botley confusion. Bishop Pete Broadbent.
Take a pew.
And here we are in the West London borough of Ealing, and specifically we are in the home of our marvellous guest, Bishop Pete Broadbent. Now, Bishop Pete, just before we get going, I'm a bit rusty on forms of address. What do we call you? Your right reverendiness or holy something? Or...
Try Pete, that's my name.
Brilliant, thanks. So, Pete, thanks for having us, and please, take a pew.
Hello, Pete. It's lovely to meet you. Perhaps you could just introduce yourself to our wonderful listeners.
So, hello, I'm Pete Broadbent. I'm 69 years old. I'm married to Sarah. We have one son, Simon, who lives up in Watford, and he has some children who are our grandchildren, 3 of them. And I'm currently retired as Bishop of Willesden, but working for the Diocese of London.
Brilliant. Now, probably more so than most of our previous guests, you unsurprisingly have a fairly long Wikipedia page. But this being the Take a Pew podcast, we're looking forward to getting to know the ordinary human being behind the dodgy wiki facts, and indeed behind the purple shirt, as we chat about everything from your childhood years to what the future may have in store, by way of some of your favourite things and your perfect picnic.
Yes, as well as asking for your help in Is It True? Posing one of my random questions, and of course receiving your spiritual pearl of wisdom.
Yes, it's going to be great. But Pete, let's crack on. Where did life start for you? I heard that it was actually not a million miles from the moon.
Sorry?
Well, I heard you were born not a million miles from the moon.
You've lost me entirely. I was born in Carshalton.
That's right, that's excellent. Well, by my calculations, that's only about 240,000 miles from the moon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not too far.
Yeah, it's a hospital in Carshalton, but that was south of the river, and south of the river is not where I wanted to stay. And when I discovered my mistake, we moved north of the river, and I grew up in Ruislip.
Okay.
I come back to my roots, because I grew up in Ruislip, my wife grew up in Ealing, and here we are back here.
Perfect. So tell us about the family when you were a little lad.
Well, I was an only child, which explains a lot, and had a couple of brilliant parents who weren't Christians but brought me up well and really gave me a good, secure background and family life, which was fabulous.
And you went to Merchant Taylor's School, I think. It sounds rather posh, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was a charity boy. This was the day. These were the days when councils paid for you to go to a public school and put you in this place. And you're going to ask me about school in a bit, so I'll save that one. But that was my experience of going to a school which was posh when I didn't really come from the posh background.
Right, okay.
So I did some research on that. It talks about producing pure gentlemen out of it, and it talks about nurturing creativity, competence and warmth in its pupils.
Well, we'll see about that.
We'll see about that.
Sounds like they did a marvellous job. But you queued us up very nicely there, Pete, because we would like to ask you a question. And our question is...
What were you like at school? Were you a little bit geeky? Or were you a little bit freaky? Or were you a little bit cheeky? What were you like at school?
Yes, Pete, what were you like at school?
I think I was probably an absolute pain in the neck to everybody. As I said, I went to a school which was not what I expected to be at. It was brilliant in terms of academic stuff, in terms of other things. It was completely useless in terms of the way in which it treated people. And it made me, I guess, more of a rebel than I already was. I remember getting sent home for wearing red socks, which was a kind of act of rebellion you could do in the 60s. And they had those moments when they would measure the length of your hair, and if it was over your collar, you were again sent home. So I had a couple of experiences like that. So I spent my time rebelling. I think it helped me to think for myself, and I loved all that. And it helped me to discern why I was going to be a socialist rather than a conservative.
Nice. And what were your particular subject favourites, if you had any?
English was what I did, and I went on to read that at university. And we had a fabulous English teacher who loved all the stuff and taught us everything from Shakespeare to modern poetry, and was really somebody who enthused about his subject. And a fantastic experience there. So I did that. So all the things that people now count as useless, English and Latin and history, which gave me a fantastic broad cultural background.
What about sport? Did you get involved?
Well, the school, of course, played rugby, because that's what they did. So the kids all rebelled by playing football in the playground. So yes, you played sport all the time. Went to school on Saturdays as well, which was difficult because I wanted to bunk off and go and watch football.
Yes, we picked up on the Tottenham Hotspur connection. Is that something that you had, an interest you had at a young age?
Lifelong. I started supporting Spurs when they won 13-2 in a cup replay, and went to my first Spurs match after they'd done the double. First English club to do that, of course.
Get that one in.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good.
Particularly for all those Arsenal fans who are listening to us.
We've had a few Arsenal fans.
Gooners, haven't we?
Too many Gooners.
Too many Gooners.
Yeah.
I always say that the Gooners this year need to read Jesus' story of Lazarus, because Lazarus, like Tottenham, came fourth.
Oh, very nice.
Very good.
I started going to Spurs when I was 15, I think, on my own, and I've been going for years and years, and I've got a season ticket, so is my wife. So we are completely hooked.
That's brilliant. Favourite player at the time?
Jimmy Greaves,
of course.
greatest striker ever. Well, Harry Kane's getting there. My worst ever experience was Walsall away in the third round of the Cup in the snow. But you do it because that's what football supporters are like.
Yeah, brilliant. It's great fun. I'm sure any of our listeners who follow the beautiful game will know that the away game is the peak of enjoyment.
Absolutely.
Sometimes. Apart from a very cold Tuesday night in Preston, I remember one time, also in the FA Cup, where the mighty AFC Bournemouth lost. Anyway, there we go. Moving on. Did you have any Saturday jobs or paper rounds or any of that sort of thing?
No, because school was on a Saturday.
No, of course you couldn't.
So couldn't do it. So no, it was right. The thing that I got into, and what actually was major for me, is that I joined a thing which was then called Crusaders.
Right.
It's now called Urban Saints, which was an organisation that tried to get kids who didn't have any church background and didn't go to church to get involved in fun and sports and that sort of thing, and to teach them Christian faith at the same time. And it's through that I became a Christian.
Oh wow,
brilliant!
Okay. And so, how did you end up going to a church in the first place?
I didn't go anywhere near a church.
Yeah.
That was a frightening place to me. And I didn't. When I first became a Christian, I didn't go to church for about a year because I couldn't bring myself to go into this strange place. So after I became a Christian, I kind of eventually decided, Christians go to church. And I remember going in there for the first time and being frightened out of my mind. What do you do? Where do you sit? I've never been in this sort of environment before because we weren't churchgoers as a family. And gradually got into it and was nurtured by a fantastic church called Ruislip Baptist Church, and a fantastic pastor who taught the faith really well, and a fantastic youth group in which I was properly nurtured as a Christian.
Brilliant. So the Crusaders came to you then, did they?
No, and what happened was, it's the usual thing, friends networks. I have friends
Yeah.
who joined and said, why don't you come to Crusaders? And I did. Of course, we can't call it Crusaders these days. It's,
I suppose, yeah, it's not
a word that's now
politically
banned,
correct, is it?
but it was Crusaders in those days.
Yes.
And they had camps, and I went to one in a place in the Isle of Wight. At the time, I was calling myself an atheist. I probably was an atheist because I couldn't see what God was about. And I spent my time in the assemblies at school taking the mickey out of the thing. But go to a camp, someone explains the story. Actually, they were telling the story of St. Paul and his conversion, and it resonated. And I thought, this makes sense. This Jesus stuff actually falls into place. And that was what made me a Christian. And I became a Christian on the 20th of August, 1966, which was a great year because England won the World Cup and I became a Christian.
Perfect. Glorious, glorious. So as we look over all that period, we've got another question for you, Pete. And our question this time is...
What's your fondest childhood memory? What's your fondest of all your childhood memories? What's your fondest?
Oh, yes. What's your fondest childhood memory?
Well, do you know, I wonder whether I was getting old when I started thinking about this, because you remember lots of people always talk about those halcyon long summer days that you spent doing stuff when you were a kid, and it seemed to go on forever. And actually it was like that. Growing up in Ruislip, we used to knock around playing football and cricket in the fields, and you just went on and on. You had these endless games of cricket with three of you. And if I can add to that slightly, it was also long days spent at Lord's watching Middlesex, which I thoroughly loved as well.
Very pleasant, very pleasant. Is there any particular specific occasion that leaps to mind as you think about that?
I'll tell you one thing that I really did enjoy. When we were on holiday, we went to see Sussex play Middlesex down at Hove. My dad was a cricket fanatic and he spent a lot of his life watching cricket. And we saw, what was it? I think it was 1,200 runs scored in about 3 days. It's short boundaries, of course. But there was some really good county cricket in those days, which, of course, is now fading away with the advent of one days and things. But it was great to watch. And people like Ted Dexter, who was the England captain, Peter Parfitt from Middlesex, were amazing to watch. And I never played cricket very well, but you could appreciate and can still appreciate the stroke play and things. It isn't all just hammer the ball over the boundary, which is a bit what it's become these days. There was some fantastically stylish cricket played.
Very nice. All sounds rather charming, I think. So we got to the end of childhood. You went on to study English.
Yep.
In Cambridge, was it?
Yeah, I went to Jesus College, Cambridge, to read English. The first person I met who I knew in Cambridge was the person who became my wife, which was rather weird.
Oh.
So we'd met at a training event run by Crusaders, and she was sort of riding around Cambridge on her bike looking for people that she'd met before, because she'd arrived in Cambridge at the same time, jumped off her bike and said, "Hello, remember me?" And I said, "No," which is a good start to the relationship. But she persevered, and we went out together throughout our Cambridge life and got married afterwards.
Brilliant.
And Cambridge, again, was a fantastic place because it teaches you to think, to question. There's nothing better than that privileged education. I realise I was very privileged in terms of educational stuff that I did.
Do you still have friends that you're in touch with? From the old
Yeah, in
days?
fact, we had a reunion because, of course, we're all now getting, to 70. So we've had 2 or 3 groups of people who've met, who've reached their 70th birthday and having 70th birthday parties and reminiscing about those times. So that's been quite fun.
Fantastic.
And what about the road to ministry? Was that bubbling along at this point?
Well, it was. I had this kind of sense that God was calling me to ordination, but didn't know very much about it. And so actually I thought, well, I'm going to go off and do some theology. So I was a Baptist still in those days, and went to St John's College, Nottingham, which is actually an Anglican vicar factory, Church of England vicar factory.
Yes.
And while I was there, I went through all this kind of thing of, actually, I think God's calling me not to the Baptist, but to the Church of England. So changed denominational horses in midstream. They shipped in a bishop to confirm me, which you have to do to make sure I was a proper Church of England person.
Yeah, stamp. Yeah.
And so then got ordained into the Church of England in 1977. The thing of I've never done a proper job comes to mind.
So straight in there, no messing about, and then you had to find a curacy, I guess, after that, like most people.
Yeah, and that was great fun because I ended up not having a job for quite a long time. It was one of those years when there are too many people for too few jobs. And then I got a call from George Carey, who was vicar of St Nicholas, Durham, and I ended up being his curate.
Wow, okay.
And Durham, University Church in the middle of Durham, St Nicholas, and again, a fabulous place to learn the trade.
So how did that work? How did you get just a call from George Carey? Was that through
Yeah, it was one. He
connections,
was told that he could have a curate, and he called the college and said, anyone left over who hasn't got a job? I said, well, only the dregs. We got Pete Broadbent. And he said, oh, all right, we'll have him anyway, you know. My second curacy was in Holloway in Islington with a wonderful vicar called Pat Darnley, who was the area dean, and I was helping him out. And that got me rooted into urban life and the nitty-gritty of all that. It was just down the road from the Arsenal, so it's a difficult place to live.
Yeah, gosh.
But it was, again, a great encounter because the level of poverty and the level of problems that you were dealing with meant that your life as a priest was interwoven with your life in terms of how you help people in the community. It was really challenging.
Now that felt like that was your place in an urban ministry, I guess.
It was. I mean, and I went on from that to be chaplain to what was then called the Polytechnic of North London, which is now styles itself as London Metropolitan University.
Okay.
And they didn't quite know what a chaplain was for, but it was in the days when they were happy to have a chaplain. Perhaps it was symbolic. My office was outside by the dustbins, which kind of was the institutional place you could be. But amazing to be able to engage with students and to try and help them find faith, to help people with a sense that they weren't sure they could be Christians in the university or polytechnic context.
Yes, interesting. And then you meddled in some politics, probably
Meddled in,
about,
yes, just
about that sort of time, was it?
Well, I, as I say, school made me into a socialist. I joined the Labour Party fairly early on, and I've been there ever since. And then it was one of those things where they were running out of candidates to stand for the local council. And they said to me, do you want to stand? And I said to my bishop, is it all right if I stand for it? And he said, yes. And I said to Sarah, it's all right, I'll never get elected. And when the election results came in, Labour had taken 51 out of 52 of the seats. So suddenly we were all thrown into this stuff. Now, actually, it worked quite well with my job at the Polytechnic because the Poly was 9 to 5. And it meant you could get involved in the political stuff in the evenings without detriment to your main role.
When you were doing any candidate husting type thing, were you presenting yourself as a man of the cloth?
No, people knew, but no, I'm very clear that you don't use the pulpit to say, vote for us. So, you know, I might obviously engage in asking questions. You know, if I were preaching today, I wouldn't shy away from saying, let's think Christianly about what this immigration policy is and whether actually sending people off to Rwanda is a good thing, you know. But that's the thing on Christian grounds. I don't say, here is my manifesto as a politician for what I do. You keep the two separate. You see, I think people think there is no Christian understanding of politics. And of course there is. And the Christian understanding is the powers that be that are ordained by God, Romans 13, but the powers that be can also go terribly wrong, Revelation 13. And so you're always living in this sense that whatever the kingdom of God is going to be like, it's going to be better than all the politics we've got at the moment. But you are here to try and make sure that things are shaped the way the kingdom of God might look. And that means things like justice and peace and giving shape to those things. And of course, there are Christians in all parties. There's no problem about that. But there are always political questions to be asked about stances that people adopt.
Yeah, interesting balance. But despite that political dalliance, you took on your own vicarship at some point.
Yes, I, after a while in the university context, things start to go round in a circle. And you've heard all the student problems. You know, they're real enough for the student, but you think, oh, not again, you know. And so I did, I think it was 5 years there, and then got a phone call from the then Bishop of Willesden, Tom Butler, to come and look at a parish in northwest London in Holy Trinity, Wealdstone, and St Michael's, Harrow Weald, and became vicar there. And that was inner Harrow, suburbia, a bit down market, not quite how you think of Harrow, but Harrow. And again, lots of the problems were there and lots of the joys were there in a church or two churches which were both seeking to reach out to their communities. Because what then happened was the archdeacon left. The bishop was, again, I think, scrabbling for somebody and asked me to become the archdeacon.
And the archdeacon, explain.
So an archdeacon is a kind of right-hand person to a bishop. Some people call it the crook at the head of the bishop's staff.
Okay, nice. I like that.
Archdeacon's the fixer, basically. Does money, does buildings, does personnel stuff, tries to make things work in the area, so that sort of thing. So all in the wheels. So I was Archdeacon of Northolt, working with the Bishop of Willesden at the time, who was a guy called Graham Dow. Then when he left to go to be Bishop of Carlisle, I got summoned to think about being Bishop of Willesden. The Bishop of London phoned me up, it's not done this way these days, and said, come to lunch. And we went to an Italian restaurant and he said, I think I want you to be Bishop of Willesden. And that was 20 years ago. And I did 20 years as Bishop of Willesden.
Perfect. So I'm sure I certainly, and perhaps even some of our listeners may be interested in what a bishop actually does. I mean, presumably you have to walk everywhere diagonally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So apart from that, which must take a lot of mental...
It does. It's very difficult. I occasionally find myself going around in circles, which you can't do on a chessboard very easily. People don't know what bishops do, and therefore there's quite a lot of our detractors who say, well, actually, we could do without them. I think the Church of England has a wisdom in having people in place who are overseeing and are backstops to all the different clergy. When I was Bishop of Willesden, I had 108 churches, 170 about clergy to look after. I mean, at that level it's impossible, but you are therefore trying to look after people, have their back, sort them out. Actually, it's interesting, you do end up playing chess, because what you're doing in your head all the time is thinking, now if so and so moves, who do I move there? So an awful lot of it is trying to get the right people in the right places. And actually, if you think about what a bishop does, the most important role we have, I think, is making good appointments of good vicars who will be able to minister in the right communities. So there was a lot of that. And there's also just leading people in spiritual understanding of the role they're doing, giving inspiration to people, trying to inspire them to evangelism, trying to help them to be able to pray creatively, trying to lead them in a mission which will reach out to what is one of the most multicultural areas in the country in Willesden. We have 4 boroughs, Brent, Ealing, Harrow and Hillingdon, and they're all majority non-white, if I can put it in those terms. And that means you're engaging with something which is really quite an exciting locality. You know, I loved it and loved the job, and I only gave it up last year because I wanted to make room, I hoped, and actually it's come to fruition, for a bishop who would be a person of colour. So my successor, Bishop Lusa, is actually of Congolese origin, and it's really exciting, because actually part of the problem is that when you've got a church that is becoming more and more not just monochromely white, in an area that certainly isn't monochromely white, you need to see leadership which reflects something of that. So that's been a real joy to me, to be able to hand over to somebody who mirrors that and can, in his own person, bring his own way of doing things. What I love about the 20 years I've been is that I can see I've appointed nearly all of the folk who are working in Willesden, and they're just a fantastic bunch of people. And it's a legacy I'm really pleased with.
Must be very heartwarming, certainly.
Absolutely.
To see that. And so, alongside that, you were for many years part of the General Synod,
Yes.
Which I like that because it's got the word sin and odd both in the same thing.
Precisely.
Talk to us a little bit about what that does, because that sounds very, very posh.
Well, it is full of sin and full of oddness, but actually, of course, the word does mean walking together on the way. That's where it comes from. People call that the kind of the Parliament of the Church of England. It's not quite that, but it certainly makes laws and it does stuff which enables the mission of the church. A lot of it, I think, is sometimes also a hot air talking shop. There's good things about that, because with a group of 550 people or thereabouts, you'll usually find that whatever topic you're talking on, there's an expert, a genuine expert, who knows something about it. So, you've actually got that diversity of opinion, but also diversity of good experience and expertise. We made some good decisions. I was really pleased to be part of seeing women ordained as priests and then as bishops. I had a bit of a hand in doing that and drafting that. I chaired a group which were trying to simplify stuff. So I was known as the simplification guru. And that was quite fun, just looking at legislation and saying, come on, we bound ourselves in knots here. How do we cut through this? Can we actually deregulate a bit in ways that will make a difference? And I had some success in that, but it's quite hard because changing law is always very difficult. So it's not everyone's taste. But I loved it and had a good number of years, from 1985 with a short gap until 2021 I was on synod.
Is it quite innovative? Do you get new ideas get taken forward?
It's like the Church of England, isn't it? It mirrors the fact that there's a great desire for change and movement, and also a great desire to dig your heels in and say, no, we can't change. Change, how many Anglicans to change your light bulb, etc. What's the answer? Change. Yeah. And there's a bit of that about, but I think we have made some changes. There's quite a big debate at the moment going on about what they call mixed ecology church. In other words, do you concentrate just on the parish system, which has stood us in good stead and should continue to do so, but do you also, on top of that, plant new churches, have new worshipping communities, which means you've got an ecology which is both parish and other stuff. And some of the parish people are a bit worried about that because they think we're taking the emphasis away from the parish church because we haven't got enough clergy to go around. I'm involved with the Gregory Centre for Church Multiplication, which is based around the ministry of Bishop Rick Thorpe, who's the Bishop of Islington, who's into church planting. And we really want to resource the church by adding on to it. But it's both and, not either or, as far as I'm concerned. But that's quite a big debate still playing out in the Church of England at the moment as to whether you put your resources into parish or whether you do it into the new stuff. And I think people sometimes resent the fact that shiny new stuff appears to be what's getting most of the attention.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and actually is quite thinking outside the box a little bit, as they say, that sort of thing, isn't it? Really? And then you mentioned Essential Christian. That's another thing that's taken up your time. You're still involved in that?
Yeah, I got drawn in. It was Spring Harvest in the days when I first started, and of course Spring Harvest still goes. But I got drawn in by Clive Calver to come and do some stuff on Christianity and politics back in 1988, and I was an adult speaker for a while, and gradually got drawn into the governance of the thing. Went on the leadership team, working with people like Jeff Lucas and Chris Rogers, who you've had on previous Take a Pew podcasts. And then I ended up chairing the charitable company that runs it, which is called Essential Christian. And Essential Christian basically does Spring Harvest. It also does Essential Event Management, which is a kind of company that goes out to run and help other events to do their stuff. It also did for a while Spring Harvest holidays at Le Pas Octon in France, though actually they've now floated off to be something else.
Okay. It's a great place, by the way, listeners, if you're looking for a holiday
yes,
on the west coast of France. We've been there many times.
You were actually on the advert, weren't you, or something?
In fact, I think Pete and I were there at he won't remember this, we were there at the same time about 20 years ago.
Oh, right, okay. And so I've been on the governing the charity of Essential Christian. I've been trying to fade out, and I've just resigned as chair and handed over to a guy called Martin Young, who's picked that up. And I will come off the trustees, because I don't think you should be doing this stuff when you're 70, when an organisation is trying to work for the younger church. So watch this space. I will actually stop doing that. But I still love Spring Harvest, and its ministry, I think, has been fantastic over the years.
You mentioned Chris Rogers there, who's currently chair of the planning group at Spring Harvest. And he mentioned you, as I said at the outset, and I think he was very pleased with what he's managed to do through Spring Harvest and said it was all thanks to you. Or in fact, he didn't say it was thanks to you, he said it was all you. So what is it about the way you work with people that means you get this?
I half mentioned this in the stuff about being a bishop, but the thing you've got to do is to spot people and say, this person has got a real ministry, what can I do to facilitate that? So with Chris, the story was that he was involved in running a little group called Soul Survivor Harrow, and I said to him, Chris, I think you ought to be ordained. And he said, I can't be faffed with all that. And I said, look, let's find you a route to ordination that doesn't involve you going and training, because actually you're already running stuff. And so I facilitated his growth into ministry. And he's now running a fantastic church plant over in Bow in East London, and he's planting. So, it's a privilege that you've got when you're sitting there as bishop. You can see people, see their gifts and say, how do I let this person loose for the sake of the gospel?
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so that sounds like all very busy. And what about in your spare time? What do you do? Now, obviously, you spend a lot of time watching Tottenham, so we've covered that one. We've covered kind of looks at that. What else? You mentioned cricket. Is it something you still follow?
I don't go these days, just simply because you haven't got the time to do everything. So you have to make a choice, don't you? And I've made the choice to make Spurs my thing. It was always quite funny when people were arranging confirmation dates when I was being a bishop, because I said to them, well, you may find the time the service moves. It depends on Sky, because they may change the kick-off time. So I do that. We do a bit of cinema going, which we'll come on to in a bit. We do a bit of relaxing in pubs. I'm a real ale fan and have loved drinking real ale. My dad introduced me to real ale, actually. He said, back in the day, beers going down the Swanee, he said. It's all becoming horrible keg stuff. It's all gassy and disgusting. It's double diamond. I had not a clue what he was talking about until he introduced me to the difference between the fizzy stuff that comes out of your cheap taps in most pubs and the stuff you pull properly on a beer pump, which comes up without so much fizz in it, where you can actually taste the beer. CAMRA, which was the campaign for real ale, was something I was involved in for a little bit, and it's been a joy because there's been this renaissance of decent ale. There's also been some pretty awful stuff brewed as well, but I love the taste of it, and you'll hear me on picnicking in a bit.
Right, perfect.
Oh, okay.
We look forward to that. Yeah, certainly it has exploded, hasn't it?
And microbreweries all over the place.
Yeah, that's right.
That and gin, it seems to be at the moment.
Yeah.
Talking of spirits, I did notice something about a clergy malt club. So what is that? If it exists?
Yes, it's a thing that happens on Twitter every midnight communion night. So what happens is clergy work their butts off all the way through Christmas, pre-Christmas, doing carol services, all sorts of things. And you get to midnight mass, which is one of the great joys of the Christian year. You're celebrating the coming of our Lord, the first communion of Christmas, and they all do it slightly differently. But there became this tradition that people would come home, put their feet up at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and the Clergy Malt Club was born. And so you've got these people all recording themselves saying, here I am with my first malt of the Christmas season, and it's just after midnight mass and I got my feet up. Some of us who prefer ale will join in and be the ale drinkers in the Clergy Malt Club. But it's a kind of a silly meme that takes place every year.
Well, Pete, we've already covered a lot of ground and you've been working very hard, so you'll be pleased to hear that it's very nearly time to settle down to a lovely picnic of the mind. But as always on the Take a Pew podcast, we can't get the Scotch eggs out until we've played our ever popular game of My Favourite Things.
My favourite things.
Yes, Pete, as you probably know, this is a very straightforward game. We give you a category such as, I don't know, Archbishops of Canterbury, and you simply tell us your favourite.
Yeah, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. We might come back to that one. Anyway, right, our first category is always your favourite book of the Bible.
I'm going to cheat and give you two.
Oh, that's fair enough.
Because they're both written by the same person. Luke and Acts.
Perfect. That is the right
Correct answer according to Ian.
Now, I know you like Acts as well, because we were talking about that. But what I love about Luke Acts is that Luke was trying to write for Gentiles. And he wanted to explain the good news of Jesus to people who had no Jewish background, and therefore he's very good for mining from in terms of explaining the gospel. And when he talks about how the church spread in the book of Acts, he gives us some fantastic things. So I spent actually one of my series at Le Pas Optant was to preach through the various encounters that the apostles had with different places in the book of Acts. And I love the fact that it shows how the gospel's relevant in all kinds of locations, and they engage with the culture, which we've always got to do as Christians. And of course, Luke's gospel gives us the insight into how Jesus was always there with the marginalised and the outcasts, and how particularly he had women involved in his ministry and went around with them in his entourage. So anyone who gets the idea that the apostles, all male, as the apostles were, are the be-all and end-all of Jesus' companionship, gets a very, very real shake-up when they read Luke, who tells us how the Gospels included women.
Yes. Well, I entirely agree with everything you've said.
I thought you might say that.
And that's the best answer we've had on the show so far. If you had to get Old Testament...
Oh, I suppose Amos. Because,
obviously, yes.
Well,
Amos.
because as someone who's into justice and into a prophetic understanding of how we can change society, Amos is the one, because Amos isn't just speaking about justice in the Jewish nation. Amos says justice is for everybody, and he addresses his prophecies to all the countries round about, so no one gets off from the demands of justice. Amos, if he were here today, would be saying a few things to Putin.
Nice.
I can imagine.
Named, of course, after a character in 1970s Emmerdale Farm. But
yes.
There's an obscure one for you.
One, yeah.
Simon.
Okay, Pete, your favourite sportsman or woman, excluding Tottenham Hotspur players, of course.
Oh, that's more difficult.
Might also say excluding cricketers as well.
Oh, wow.
No, that would be unfair.
That would be unfair.
Well, there you do stump me a bit.
So to speak.
I think I would go back to what I said to you before, which is Ted Dexter.
Right.
I think he epitomised classy cricket. Or maybe even Colin Cowdrey, who was another England captain, who was totally unassuming, dedicated Christian, played the game really, really well. I remember him coming out to bat with a broken arm in a test match and staving off defeat against the West Indies. And he was somebody who epitomised the old school of cricket. And although we've got some fantastic heroes these days like Ben Stokes, I quite like the way Cowdrey carried himself.
Brilliant. Clear winner.
That's good.
But if you were to choose a Spurs player...
Oh, yeah.
Well, Greaves, of course, was the best striker I've ever seen, but the guy who made the team tick, well, the two of them actually, in those days, one was Danny Blanchflower, who was the captain, again, very modest man, ran away from This Is Your Life, famously, because he didn't want to be interviewed. And of course, those days they did it live. Captain of Northern Ireland, and he really held the team together. And another wonderful player called John White, tragically killed by being struck by lightning a year after Spurs won the double. But having seen those players, you realise what skills they had. And they did it on pitches which were blooming awful. Yeah. You know, how you control the ball when you were in sort of ruts and holes and mud and things, and not the billiard table sort of stuff that they have in the Premier League these days.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, our next category, as always this season, is a top 5. Your top 5 films, Pete.
Yeah, I had a long think about this. It's quite a difficult one. I start with Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if anyone else has gone for that one, but because that really is a film which is about redemption. It's about a guy who's locked up unjustly for a murder he didn't commit, and spends his time in Shawshank trying to alleviate the life of the prisoners there who are being bullied and really badly treated by the warders. And he then fashions his escape by digging a hole through the wall of his cell and breaks out and gets away. And he also manages to tell people the warden has been screaming off money, and the warden commits suicide as he's caught by the police.
Spoiler alerts, but there we go.
Well, I think
most people have probably seen
everybody's seen it, but
Yes.
it's a fantastic
It's
film
fantastic,
about
isn't
somebody being able to overcome horrendous things and bring some goodness. Signs of the kingdom of God, if you like.
Right,
into the place.
lovely. Okay. Yeah. Good choice.
Then I go for The Godfather. Do I have to have one? Godfather 1 and Godfather 2 are actually Godfather 2 is probably the best.
Yes.
So well told, so well directed, real atmosphere about those. Atmospheric films are us.
I think, Godfather 2 I would go for, and it would certainly be in my top 5 as well.
Then there's one you might not have heard of called Dogma. Now, Dogma's a really off-the-wall film. It's a comedy, and it's about 2 fallen angels who are about to end the world by getting, in fact, end the whole of the universe by getting themselves a plenary indulgence by walking through the doors of a church. It's a slightly convoluted thing, but it's basically a bit of a laugh about Catholicism, but actually with some very serious points about why it is that we do what we do, and whether it's more important to try to make a change in the world, or whether it's more important just to end the world together. And it's played with some fantastic aplomb by those who are involved. Government health warning, it's full of swear words and full of some quite blasphemous thoughts. But actually any Christian watching it will start thinking, this makes me think about the realities of our universe and how God relates to us. Starring performance by Alan Rickman, who comes as the messenger of God and appears to the person who's called to be the redeemer of things.
Right,
Great
I
fun.
can imagine that. I think I have heard of it vaguely, but I'm not sure I've seen it. Yes, very good.
And then The Good, the Bad and the Ugly.
Oh, okay.
Because it's long. You take a picnic with you, take popcorn. You know, it's got a lot going for it. But
Well, they used to have intervals in films in those days.
they did. That's
yeah.
right. But and that shows you what an epic filmmaker can do with a story and make it into something quite exciting. Best Western ever, really.
Right. Okay.
And then am I allowed a Harry Potter?
Of course you are.
Oh, yes.
So
yes.
Deathly Hallows is probably the best. I think Deathly Hallows 2.
Yeah. The very, very last film then.
Yeah.
Have you watched? You've watched all the Harry Potter?
Oh, incessantly. I'm a great fan, and of course, very funny when it first came out. Of course, Christians were not sure what to make of it, and we had to do seminars at Spring Harvest about is it evil to watch Harry Potter because it's about witches and wizards, and there are some Christians who still do think it's it's about that. I think it's got a redemption theme to it, and it's got the Christian story, and J.K. Rowling knew what she was doing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, very good choice of films.
Yeah, interesting.
Happy.
Okay, well, try this for size, Pete. Your favourite powder?
I don't think I use any powder. Talcum powder? Isn't that now beyond it?
Well, all
I don't
sorts
think
of
people
powders.
have it these days, do they?
Sort of edible powders, things like
I
that.
don't think I want to go there, thank you.
I was thinking of things like Nesquik. And
Oh, I
things
see.
like that.
Not ingesting something up your nose.
No.
Snuff.
Not for a moment.
No, of course not.
Bird's custard powder. Gravy powder.
Yes, you use granules these days, don't you?
Oh yeah, gravy.
I think I'll take a powder on that one.
Okay. Okay. Brilliant. Your favourite powder, Ian? What would you say?
Possibly. I would say. Well, I tell you what. This is very strange. Okay.
Yeah.
I used to, when I was young, there was a thing called Andrew's liver salts, and that was a powder. And on the back of the tin, little tin you used to get, and it always said to have as an antacid or something, or as a laxative possibly. And then it also gave the alternative as a refreshing drink. So it's just 1 teaspoon in water as a so I used to have Andrew's liver salt. It was delicious. I loved Andrew's liver salt. So
Gosh,
whether that's my favourite powder or not, I don't know.
I would say mine would be Nesquik, definitely.
Was it Nesquik? Which was chocolate, strawberry?
Chocolate.
Chocolate Nesquik. There we go. Favourite powder in the entire world.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's very good. Oh well, right.
Okay, good.
Well, our fifth and final category is always multiple choice. I'll give you 3 possible answers. Now, we are here today in Ealing, famous for, amongst other things, being at one end of the London District line on the Underground. So we'd like to know your favourite line. So 3 possible answers. The classic C.S. Lewis chronicle, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Oh.
Classic kitchen floor covering, Lino. Or classic British entertainer, Lionel Blair. Your favourite line?
Well, it's got to be C.S. Lewis.
Right.
Because, again, parallel with J.K. Rowling.
Yes, well,
here you are, a man more deliberately writing something about the Christian faith, which is understandable by children, and where you can read those fantastic stories of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, etc. And you don't need to get that it's about Jesus, but it helps.
Lino, you can't beat a bit of
Can't
Lino.
be Lino, can you?
Yeah.
Well, we've got wooden floor here.
Oh, well, yeah, that's the...
Lino wouldn't do it.
That's the choice of West London. So. There we go. So,
Anyway,
Lion,
yes.
the Witch and the Wardrobe. Perfect. Well, a simply staggering collection of favourites there, Pete. And That means it must be time for us to ask you the question.
What would you pick in your perfect picnic if the picking were up to you? Would you be sticking in some finger-licking chicken, or would you be silly and pick Piccalilli? Tell us, what would you choose? Yum, yum.
Yes, what would you pick in your perfect picnic?
Let me cheat a little bit, because I want to take you to Bournemouth Beach.
Nice.
And Bournemouth Beach, which of course I know is a fond place for many of you, we were on holiday in Bournemouth, and we walked on the beach, and we suddenly saw a group of people who looked vaguely familiar. And they'd set up a table and chairs and lots of heating devices, and it was the whole crew of one of our churches in those days called St John Southall. And they had come down en bloc, and they were having a Punjabi picnic on the beach. Now, a Punjabi picnic beats absolutely everything, because you get all the stuff in cooking tins.
Yes,
and they share this stuff with you. And so they said, Bishop Pete, come over here and share. And of course, the great joy of our churches in Southall is they're so hospitable. So we sat down with them surreally on Bournemouth Beach, and we had rice and curry and chapatis and all sorts together on Bournemouth Beach. Not really the orthodox picnic.
Nice.
And maybe cheating in your categories, but I rather liked that. If you wanted what I would do for a picnic otherwise, I think it would be probably going to sit on having climbed to the top of a mountain somewhere.
Or having been airdropped from a helicopter, maybe.
Oh no, you've got to do the climb first.
Okay.
In order,
You've got to earn it.
No cheating.
Yeah.
No cheating.
Okay, you've got to earn it. Okay, fair
and
enough.
you take them with you some decent ale and some really mature cheese and some pickled onions. And you were having a kind of mini ploughman's sitting there gazing out over the landscape. And probably the Lake District, actually, just looking out from the top of somewhere like Ullswater and just seeing the stuff ahead of you.
Nice.
So would that include Piccadilly then? If you have
Not necessarily. I hope not, because that would be silly, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Silly Piccadilly, yeah.
That would be silly.
Yeah.
But okay, so what cheese and what ale?
That's quite a forceful question.
Yeah, come on. We need to detail.
Okay, Old Speckled Hen, which I like very much, or Timothy Taylor Landlord, both of which are widely available.
Yeah.
Cheese, at the moment I'm quite loving Comté, which is French cheese, which has more to it than cheddar, I think, in terms of just refined taste.
It's quite an unusual taste, Comté, isn't it?
It is,
I do
isn't
like a nice bit of Comté.
I don't know. What sort of texture is it then? Is it similar?
Sort of. I mean, it's a hard cheese.
It's not dissimilar from cheddar.
Yeah.
And of course, not to be confused with the manager of Tottenham Hotspur.
Well, Pete, we hope you get to enjoy such a picnic, be it on Bournemouth Beach or at the Ullswater very soon. But back to the Chronicles of Broadbent. We've wandered along the avenues of your life thus far. Now we turn to look forward down the boulevard of time to come as we ask you...
12 years from now, where would you like to be? Working hard in a town, or chilling by the sea? 12 years from now, what would you like to be doing? Or would it mainly be the same? Or would you rather be canoeing for example?
Yes, Pete. What would you like us to be talking about if we were having this conversation with you 12 years from now?
Well, I have to preface it with, if the Lord spares me, I suppose, because, 12 years, you're looking towards the future. I don't know whether I'll still be around or not, I don't think Christians ever retire completely. I'm stopping the paid job that I'm doing at the moment at the end of this September. Okay. So I'll have to adjust to a new way of being. But I hope I'll still be helping out with churches and doing what I can to be useful. And getting engaged in sharing the faith with others. It's a slightly obvious answer, but it's not a daft answer. I think that's what we're called to do. We don't stop until we stop. So I haven't got ambitions as such. I just want to go where God lets me go. And if things come my way, then so be it. So I am involved with a thing called Ealing Street Pastors, where we go out. I've just started that because having moved to Ealing, chairing that group, and we try and help people who are out on the streets, not in a good way sometimes, on a Friday night or a Saturday night throughout Ealing. So if I can serve in that way, just by helping facilitate that kind of ministry, I love to do so. I want to be involved with the church planting ministry of the Bishop of Willesden. So there'll be stuff you can do.
Yeah.
I quite like Spurs to have won something.
Yeah.
There we go.
Hopefully by then, yeah, you never know.
European champions under Antonio Conte.
Yeah, they've got a good chance.
But, well, we wish you every blessing wherever life may take you, Pete. And so we come to the highbrow part of the show, where no theological stone is left unturned.
Indeed. Very shortly, Pete, we'll ask you for your spiritual pearl of wisdom. But as ever, we need your help in confirming or denying a particular Bible-related theory. And we call this part of the show...
Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Is it true?
Yes, is it true? And this time we have a quandary surrounding the compilation of the Bible itself. Because we have read on the internet that it was not until the 4th century AD that the final so-called canon of the New Testament was agreed upon. So far, so good. But then we hear two other points of detail. First is that the council or synod held to agree what should be included in the New Testament somehow involved some hippos. But that seems very unlikely, and I reckon very few people actually get that joke, so let's move on. More believably, we have heard that when the council came together, they discovered that although they had been provided with one piece of historical writing and lots of letters from the years shortly after Jesus, there were no actual accounts of Jesus' life itself, and that such a record was considered essential. And so they launched what was a sort of Eurovision gospel contest. They invited entries, and lots of people got busy writing stories about Jesus. And from all the submissions, the council chose 4. 3 from Israel, who therefore had a very successful competition, and 1 from Greece. And that was how we got what we now have as the complete New Testament. So, Bishop Pete Broadbent.
Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Is it true?
Is it true? I like the idea of that being a Eurovision Song Contest. Of course, it's not true in quite the way you put it. But there was some conversation about what they'd received in terms of books which had credibility, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and those that got rejected, like the Gospel of Thomas. And they had to make choices, and it was really a test of authenticity. Those who've done the spade work in terms of looking at the ones that were rejected would say mostly they were not really authentic because of the ways in which they talked about Jesus, and they'd been influenced by other philosophical understandings. I reckon they got it right, and it was a good choice to have Matthew, Mark, Luke and John and to exclude others.
And of course, the Gospels that we do have were largely contemporaneous, really, within 20, 30 years, weren't they? So
yeah, you've got some stuff that we can be fairly certain is trustworthy in the Gospel narratives. And if you look at how the Gospels came together, there's a real sense in which these are eyewitness accounts. I mean, whether it was actually Peter sitting down telling the story to Mark, which is what some people think, or how it all worked quite, we don't know, but there's plenty of theory.
brilliant. Okay.
So do you know how many got nil point then? Do we know how many were?
Well, there were bizarrely. My research shows there was an entry from Norway,
Oh, was there?
which was a kind of Viking-based
Viking-based sort of heavy
legend,
rock
really.
type
Yeah,
thing.
didn't really cut the mustard as far as I was
Yeah.
going to say.
Yeah. Okay.
Gaul, a couple from Gaul, but
Oh, yeah.
who knows?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
crazy. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
thanks for that,
Thank you,
Simon.
Spurs.
That's
The danger is that Ukraine might have won it.
They may well have done.
Excellent.
Anyway,
Thank you for that.
Well, yeah, with that,
Yeah.
Pete, perhaps you could restore some sanity with your spiritual pearl of wisdom.
It's a spiritual pearl of wisdom.
So I chose as my spiritual pearl of wisdom to do what I'm actually doing. We're recording this on Trinity Sunday weekend. So I just wanted to talk about the Trinity. It kind of harks back to the thing you were talking about the Bible coming into being, because of course the doctrine of the Trinity didn't really come into being straight away. There are whiffs of it in the New Testament, like Jesus sending out the disciples and saying, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, in the Great Commission. But they hadn't really developed their understanding of the Trinity for some time. But the Trinity is there, and it's there in our experience of God. What did the early Christians think? They thought, I've met this Jesus, and he's gone away. And we've just celebrated the Ascension and Pentecost and the coming of the Spirit. And they realised that Jesus was with them in the power of the Spirit. So they experienced Jesus, who taught them to know God the Father and said, call God our Father, the Father who'd been around in their understanding in the Scriptures, the Jesus who'd been with them on earth, the Holy Spirit who then came and lived among them. And that's how the developing doctrine of the Trinity came into being. John chapter 16, Jesus says to the disciples, I've got many things to say to you. You can't bear them now. When the Spirit comes, he'll guide you into all the truth and will declare to you the things to come. And of course, that gives us an understanding of the inspiration of Scripture. And if you want to know what the real story, it wasn't the Eurovision Song Contest. It was, in fact, the Spirit enabling these people as they deliberated together to form the Scriptures. He will glorify me because he'll take what's mine and declare it to you. All the Father has is mine. For this reason, I say, he'll take what's mine and declare it to you. And that's where you've got a beginning in John's Gospel of John saying, this is what our experience is about, the Trinity. And I've often tried to work out what the best way to help people into faith is. And I think talking about our experience of God enables us to get to it. You see, these days people haven't got much sense of sin, but they have got a sense of something about God. And so I quite often say to people, look, if you want to know what you're trying to join something which is actually God himself, the Holy Trinity. And I want to get you from your own sense of just being a spiritual person, which loads of people say these days, to understanding that if you're really going to experience God, you've got to experience it through the Trinity. And I want to pray for you that the Holy Spirit will come, reveal to you the person of Jesus Christ, who is the only trustworthy and authentic expression of God, who's come and lived among us and died for us and rose again. And he is the one who reveals God to us. And if you begin to see that, that's what authentic Christianity is all about. And you're absorbed into this relationship. Some people call it a dance, not quite what I would use, but that sense of the interrelationship of the persons of the Trinity, which means that we are all able to be a part of that. God says, come and join my life. Come and join my dance. Come and be a part of what things are. You may have to put things behind you. You may have to repent of some sins. You may have to sort out your life, but you'll do it because you're linked in with me. And that speaks to our need for spiritual understanding. And it speaks to the yearning that people have, often quite a long way outside the church, for what spiritual meaning is. And I love to see people who come on that journey, and I want to say to them, come on, you're going to get confirmed, and as you do so, you'll confess the life of God, the Trinity. And that's so much at the centre of what we do and who we are. And once you get that, you're baptised in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You're confirmed into that same faith, and you've become part of what God wants you to be. We are joiners with the Trinity.
It's a spiritual pearl of wisdom.
Well, thank you very much for that, Pete. Wonderful. And that just leaves us with everyone's favourite part of the show. Sorry, no one's favourite part of the show. As we bring you...
Simon's Random Question.
Simon, what is your random question for Bishop Pete?
Well, Bishop Pete, I must admit that some of my random questions have been a little ridiculous. But
Surely not.
But I've decided to be very sensible and practical today, you'll be pleased to know. So my random question for you is this. Would you rather have to wear your bishop's mitre, that's the big pointy hat, would you rather have to wear your mitre all of the time, or never wear any shoes?
Oh, that's a very important question.
Well,
it's very sensible.
Yeah. Well, and the obvious answer is it's never wear any shoes. Because the bishop's mitre, I've always thought was a bit of faff anyway. You wear it not because you necessarily want to, but because it's part of the uniform. And actually, people said to me, "Why do you wear a mitre?" I say, "Because people expect it, and particularly people from other national backgrounds and churches where they're much more into dressing up these days." So, I'm quite happily not wear the mitre at all. And actually, I suppose not wearing any shoes would take me back to my old 1960s hippie days. So there's no contest.
Gosh.
That was quite straightforward.
That was
really.
straightforward. I thought you might say your mitre actually for some reason. Yeah, but
It's a bit. It looks a bit silly in like Morrison's or something.
it does a bit, doesn't it?
But they're not wearing any shoes.
It's quite tall, isn't it, as well? So you have to sort of bend to get through.
You do, yeah. There are some
Doorways and
churches
stuff.
I earmark places where I know the ceiling is low as you come out of the vestry.
Oh, really?
It's not
Yeah,
top.
yeah.
But it might have been the right answer, but it probably wasn't.
No.
It might have been.
But even in the car, even a car, because you wouldn't fit in
you
a
wouldn't
car.
fit the car,
If you had to wear it all the time, you'd have to get a car with a sunroof, and then you'd have to kind of staple the mitre to your hair or something, because it would blow off.
Yeah.
But you have worn a mitre. You have had to wear a mitre, have you, Pete?
Yeah, I still do.
Right.
I do confirmations, and I was wearing mine last Sunday. I was doing a confirmation
right, okay.
in Kensal Town, and
Yeah. Do you have your own? Or?
oh yeah, you get that they fund you the kit.
Okay.
When you become a bishop, so you have to have a gold one and a white one.
Okay.
You don't want to know.
I think it's quite interesting.
Do they have to be dry cleaned on a regular basis?
Well, probably, but I'm not sure I have. After 20 odd years, it needs mending actually.
Oh right, okay. Okay.
You could turn it upside down, fill it with some speckled hen,
Indeed,
and
yeah.
use it as a rather nice large tankard, couldn't you?
Yeah, you might actually lose some of it.
Yeah,
Though.
it
I'd
wouldn't be
rather have a
waterproof,
tank.
would it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
True. Actually, you have to line it, wouldn't
Probably.
you?
Well, there we go.
There we
Anyway.
go. Oh, that's interesting.
Well,
That
Simon.
was quite straightforward. That was good. I like that.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
was. But I'm beginning to see why that feature is where it is in the popularity stakes. But in any case, that was
Simon's random question.
And so, Pete, you will be relieved to know that concludes the Take a Pew business for another episode. Thank you for having us. Thank you for being such a good sport. And all in all, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope loads of people enjoy themselves with some of the Christian stories we're telling.
Brilliant. And dear listeners, thank you for joining us once again. I think I'm excited to tell you that the next episode will be a recording of our first ever live show. And indeed, if you'd like to join us in the audience for that recording, which will be on the 2nd of July, you'll find the details on our social media pages. In the meantime, it's Toodle Pip from me.
And Tatty Bye from me.
Join us again next time as we take a pew.
Take a